Thank you very much, Dee. Good afternoon. Did you get suckered into buying a new build house but on a leasehold, so you had to make ongoing payments? There's government action on that.
BBC Radio 2.
But first, let's go to the newsroom and see what's breaking with the very latest BBC News, read by Catherine Cracknell.
Thanks, Jeremy. The government is planning to ban leasehold charges being levied on new houses in England and says it wants to dramatically reduce ground rents as well. The Community Secretary Sajid Javid said such fees were unjust and unnecessary. Dudley Joyner from the Leaseholder Association, which represents owners of leasehold flats, said the consumer protections that were meant to be in place seem to have failed in some cases.
Questions have to be asked here. What has gone wrong with this process? How is it these individuals have got into this situation, find themselves owning a property with all these various draconian clauses in leases which now prevent them from selling that property on? Do they have claims back against solicitors or the estate agent for not being open and transparent when they bought the property?
BBC Radio 2.
Now, it should be one of life's great moments, the point when you finally get the keys to your brand new house on a recently built estate. The legal paperwork is done and you never need to see a conveyancer again. You walk through the front door for the first time. You're hit by the smell of fresh paint and the excitement that this place is all yours so long as you pay the mortgage, of course. But there's a catch, and it's buried in the small print. It is called a leasehold, and it means you don't own the whole place outright. Someone else does, and you lease it from them for a fixed period of time. If that freeholder then doubles your ground rent and charges you for doing things like putting a conservatory into the garden, you got real problems. And many people who've bought new build properties have experienced these difficulties. So the government is proposing now a crackdown on charges that it describes as unjust and unnecessary. If you've been the victim of a leasehold rip-off, you can tell us about it by calling 08000 288 291. Email vine@bbc.co.uk, and of course there's Twitter and Facebook as well. Let's talk to Katie Kendrick first, who bought a new build house. And where and when? Katie, tell us first.
Hi, yeah, I bought a new build house from Bellway in 2014 in Ellesmere Port in Cheshire.
And it was about 214,000?
It was, that's right.
And when you bought it, were you told, look, this isn't freehold, it's leasehold?
Yeah, I was fully aware that it was leasehold. I didn't particularly want a leasehold. In fact, I didn't really view them initially because it was leasehold. But I wanted to use the government's Help to Buy scheme, and it had to be on a new build property. And within the Northwest, there's no freeholds anywhere in the Northwest for new builds, so I didn't really have a choice. But I was informed by the sales lady that I could purchase a freehold after 2 years for between £2,000 and £4,000. So I really wasn't alerted to it because I thought I'm going to be out of this leasehold issue within 2 years. Right.
And did the leasehold, as you went into it, just simply mean you paid a minimal rent yearly or what?
Well, it's not a minimum. It's not the old-fashioned peppercorn rent that people refer to. I mean, leasehold have been around for many years, but it was also always referred to as a peppercorn rent, a £5 a year or a nominal fee. When houses are built on church land, but this is different. This is my ground rent is £150 a year, rises with inflation, initially after 10 years and every 5 years after that. So I haven't actually had a rise in my ground rent yet, and I don't know how much that will be. Half of my estate are Taylor Wimpey and half are Bellway. The Taylor Wimpey side have a doubling clause in their ground rent, which mean that every 10 years their ground rent doubles. So by the time they get to the year 2050, they'll be paying over £9,000 a year in ground rent. Ooh. And that ground rent is for nothing. It's for no service, no nothing. It's just a fee that you pay them for absolutely no service at all.
So what are you paying annually in this ground rent at the moment?
So I pay £150 a year in ground rent.
And I'm just trying to work it out. Did you say it doubles every year? Or?
No, mine personally doesn't double.
Yeah.
Mine goes up with inflation. Initially after 10 years, so I'll have my first increase after 10 years linked with inflation.
Okay. So that's not, at the moment, that's not troubling you too much, is that right?
Yeah, well, you see, this scandal is much bigger than just how much you pay per year in ground rent. Once they've sold the freeholds on, which is what Bellway did in my case after 18 months, they've sold it on to a third-party investor. And that's what makes them so attractive, is the X factor. And the X factor is that permission fees. So basically permission to do any improvement to the house whatsoever. So I wanted to put a small extension on my property. Bellway would have charged me £300 permission to build. Now my new freeholder wants £2,600 just to say yes.
So I see. They just find an excuse to charge you things, basically.
Yes, they do. And that's not what's written in the lease. I know people listening to this will think, well, you've signed the lease and you should have read the small print. This was not in the small print. Yes, they can't change the lease. The lease is £150. It raises every 10 years with inflation. That is not what I've got the qualm about. It's the fact that they've sold that on. And then it's basically a toxic asset. You know, we are a money-making machine for these people that have bought the freehold.
Do you know
and
who's
they
bought
knew
them, by the way? Are they foreign investors or what?
Well, this is another can of worms. We actually don't know who owns our freehold. It's managed by a company called Homeground, who is owned by William Astor, which has links to David Cameron. The actual freeholder is a company called Adriatic Land Number 4. You know, there's Adriatic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's all these Adriatic companies. We don't know who the actual owner of Adriatic is.
Yeah, but now the question is whether this idea that from the estate agent that you could buy it all back for between £2,000 and £4,000, whether that is realistic now.
No, I've now approached my new freeholder, and Homeground have come back and said that they wanted £13,000 to purchase my freehold. They have since come back and said 7,600, but they're still keeping in restrictions on that because that's known as an informal offer. And I'm not going to accept any informal offer because they keep restrictions in, which means that even though I purchase my freehold from them, I'd still have to ask permission to do stuff.
Well, thank you, Katie. We're going to talk to an expert in just a tick so we can find out some more about this. But thank you very much indeed. Wow, what a story. New build house and Liverpool, the area, and the nightmare leasehold. Sebastian O'Kelly is from the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, a charity which campaigns for leasehold reforms. And I'm guessing that sort of pattern, maybe not the same numbers, is what you've heard a lot about.
We have heard a lot about this. And I just want to pay tribute to Katie Kendrick, who set up a Facebook group of more than 6,000 people who've got these toxic assets. She's done absolutely brilliant social sort of civic work on this, and if there are any gongs going for leasehold, she should get one.
Well, why can't she just say, OK, I was sold this on the basis that I could buy the leasehold for £2,000 to £4,000. That's what I'm paying. That's what I want.
Well, that's what we want to achieve. But the anonymous buyers of this freehold and many thousands of others who hide their beneficial ownership behind nominee directors and are often based offshore don't want to sell, or they want to sell at an exorbitant amount of money. Now, a property tribunal can make them sell at a reasonable sum of money, but it's way in excess of what Bellway and Taylor Wimpey originally told these people they could buy their freeholds for.
I always thought that you get leaseholds on a flat and you get freeholds on a house.
Leaseholders.
Am I very old-fashioned in saying that?
No, you're as old-fashioned as I am. But it's as leasehold is a complete racket and has been a money-making machine, as you and I know well, and we were always warned to be careful of it. House builders have gone around the country building leasehold houses because it's so profitable. In 2010, there were only 3,400 leasehold houses registered on the land registry. Last year, it had gone up to 10,300 new build leasehold houses. So they see the benefit of this. The people like Katie were buying a home for her family. She's got a young family, young child. She was buying a home to live there for summer. Instead, the house builder was building an investment asset to be sold on to anonymous investors, as I say, often based offshore.
Because it's like leaving a sort of almost a virus in the contract, isn't it? Because you can't control what that leasehold becomes while you own the house.
It's exactly like a virus, and I think it's a very good analogy. I think the other good analogy is that Katie and her friends have come up with the term fleecehold for this racket, and I think it's very appropriate.
So will the government's plans today affect the people who have already got a problem like Katie?
It will, because although Sajid Javid is going to sort of stop leasehold houses in future, there's going to be this review period. It is very difficult to see how house builders come off well from a review that shines a light into this very murky area of residential property.
So hopefully people will be able to get out of existing deals, do you think? Or?
I think that is going to come. I think we're going to see some serious legal threats and possibly even legal actions over this, and I think people owning freeholds are going to be very worried. I notice that one of the larger freehold funds already says that media coverage of this of this issue has depressed the fund by between £4.5 and £6 million in its value.
Thank you very much indeed. Sebastian O'Kelly from the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, which is campaigning for leasehold reform, which the government has signalled it's very, very interested in doing. You may have a lease on your property and you are having to pay rent that goes way beyond what anybody told you about.
In the summertime.
Meanwhile, Leaseholds, and Jeff emails and says, my partner and her elderly father bought 2 new adjoining houses in 2006. They each had a 150-year lease at £170 per annum, and they've been trying to sell them. We asked to buy the freehold, and it came through at £7,000. And it was only available for 2 weeks. This is one hell of a rip-off. They're calling it Fleasehold. Andrew Atwood emails, we've just bought our leasehold and we were shocked by how much it cost. We paid nearly $9,000 for it. We never realised the longer you leave paying it off, the more it will cost. So it's particularly leaseholds on new build houses. We understand there's leases on flats for various reasons, particularly long, flats that have been there for a while, older flats. But houses, new build houses, why? John in Teddington, good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon to you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on.
No trouble. You can tell us about flats, because you've got a flat that's got a leasehold on it.
Yes, I do. I have a flat that has a leasehold arrangement on it, and the leaseholder changed a few years ago. And since then, I was saying to your researcher, what happens is, a classic example is, we have to have buildings insurance as a collective. We could get that insurance for probably around about £1,000, we reckon. We have no choice who insures us. We have to go through the freeholder. The freeholder then selects a policy which costs us something like £7,000 or £8,000 a year, and you'll never guess who the broker is. That'll be them.
Funny,
so they are the broker.
Yes.
So that's one example. The next favourite one is every time they do anything to the property, and I'm in construction, so I know you've got to look after things. They get their contractors in. They get 3 tenders, so they get 3 estimates for the work. They'll all be vastly ridiculous and overinflated, and the one that always wins the contract will always be within usually the same postcode area, if not the same building as their main office is. So I suspect there's some sort of kickback going on there. The work's usually pretty shoddy as well, and if you complain about it, they tell you that they'll get somebody back round to rectify it, and they'll charge you more money for putting it right or anything like that.
How awful. Now, how many people are involved in this in your one block of flats then?
Well, I was just saying to your researcher, one of the problems we've got is the flats are actually flats above shops, and the crafty old freeholder obviously happens to know the law quite well. And I believe I'm correct in saying that if the commercial area is more than 50% of the whole area, we cannot, as leaseholders, we can't purchase the freehold.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's how that works. So we are pretty well trapped in by it. I was saying to you, researcher, we had quite a lot of damage caused to our flat through negligence of the owners not looking after the drains, which caused our flat to flood and flooded the shop down below. And within 24 hours, I'd got the stiffest letter you've ever seen from the freeholder demanding that I pay everything or face court and all the rest of it. Because I'm a plumbing heat engineer by trade, and I'd been there and seen what had happened, I wrote them an equally stiff letter stating everything that I'd discovered. Yeah. And I sent it recorded delivery and never even got a reply. They're basically bullies.
Yeah, thank you, John. Worrying behaviour of people who own your freehold. Jonathan Poulter in Chapel on the Frith in Derbyshire. Good afternoon.
Hello to you.
And yours is a new build?
Ours is a new build, yes. It's on a new development, a site of about 170 houses, and I've recently found out that about 80 of them have been, including ours, have been purchased by a third-party trust fund.
And because, of course, in the old days, if you bought a house, you bought the land it was on, and there wasn't a lease element to it at all, but obviously there's some way of them making more money through selling the lease on a couple of years later. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, but they actually haven't waited a couple of years. We had a letter. We moved in last September, and we had a letter probably in the first few months of the year telling us that we'd actually our lease had actually been sold already, so the development actually hasn't been finished yet, and already our lease is owned by somebody else.
And how do you feel about it?
Well, we've tried to contact this company. They have a website. There's no telephone number. There's no physical address. And it costs £50 to find out, how much the freehold is. So everything you're paying for, basically, right from the word go.
Gosh, terrible, Jonathan. Thank you. David Wilson in Epsom, Surrey says, it's an absolute scandal, this. It's the builders trying to make extra money out of a property sale. It's an absolute con. At the end of the day, if nobody bought these things, they wouldn't be able to get away with it. But the government should have taken action long ago. Chris Barrett is in Maidstone and he says, young first-time home buyers are vulnerable to these leasehold scams. My daughter and the rest of the estate she lives on have been conned. They pay £100 a year in ground maintenance fees for 2 tiny patches of grass. The fee was agreed by the builders and the ground maintenance company. It's written into the transfer documents, so it's incredibly hard to stop it. This sounds like such a rip-off, this. Colin Hingston from Southampton says, leasehold of property is a criminal rip-off, and I'm so glad the Minister Sajid Javid plans to restrict it. Barbara is in Norwich. The lease on my flat is now only 72 years. If I want to sell it, I'd have to renew the lease up to 99 years again. She's in Norwich. If I did this, renew it to 99 years, the freehold managers would charge me £15,000.
Jeremy Vine, 88 to 91 FM, BBC Radio 2.
Tony Harrison in Warrington says, we had a leasehold on our property decades ago. It was £3 a year for 99 years. But when I asked to buy the leasehold from the landlords, they asked for £546. That was acceptable. But things are ridiculous now. That's what they know as peppercorn rent, isn't it? But I don't think they do that thing anymore, peppercorn rent. Paul emails, why aren't the leaseholders offered the freehold in the first instance, which as far as I understand is required by law in most circumstances? It's a criminal offence for freeholders to sell a leasehold to somebody else who's not the leaseholder if they haven't offered it to the leaseholder first of all, surely. Chris Hawksworth in Harrogate, beautiful Harrogate, where I was at the Theakston's Crime Writing Festival last week, says, I chair a charitable trust that holds leasehold properties, and the companies below us charge private homeowners ground rents, and they're supposed to pass it on to us. But they don't. We need that money to take care of the land these properties are on. It's unacceptable. We've had to take these companies to court. No wonder they're calling it leasehold.